All right. So before we look and read through the essay, I'm just going to say that we're going to break it down part by part. So he's provided me with an introduction and 3 body paragraphs. We might not have time to go through all 3 body paragraphs depending. I remember working with him through this essay before and we needed a lot of feedback. Sorry, just closing my flux. But we needed a lot of feedback. So we might not have time to go through everything. Yeah, there's 3 body paragraphs here. So before we go through it, let's have a look at the question so that we actually know what we need, what are we actually looking for. So the question is, how does the author utilize setting to convey a theme and or perspective? So in the question, some important elements here. We first have to think about what theme is being conveyed or what perspective is being conveyed by the author or by the text, really. So we have to be specific in listing a theme or perspective. Now, since this is a year 11 question, we actually talk about themes, but you know, when you move on to semester 2, year 11 and year 12, we basically never ever talk about themes anymore. We usually talk about how themes are conveyed or what the text teaches us about themes. And that is actually called an idea. Stop doing that. That is actually called an idea. So what does the text teach us about the theme? Or what does the text say about the theme? For example, the theme could be war, the theme could be love, the theme could be the environment. But the idea is what the text would teach us about war. What does it say about love? Maybe, you know, to be in love is the ultimate goal in life or something like that. So what does it actually say about the theme? And that's the idea. So if you want to demonstrate a higher level of understanding in this question, I would not just talk about the theme, I would talk about what the theme actually teaches us or what the text actually teaches us about the theme. And it's important to be specific, right? You don't want to just say the text or the author utilizes setting to convey a theme. You want to tell me what that theme is, or you want to tell me what that perspective is. And you also want to talk about it in terms of setting. So this is important because it restricts you on what type of evidence you're allowed to use. So this is your evidence for your body paragraphs. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. So if you want to use something else like, I don't know, symbolism or something like that, it has to be related to setting. It has to be something to do with the time, something to do with the place, something to do with the environment of the main characters. So those are the 2 most important things that I'm looking for to see if you've answered the question. Have you used setting as your evidence in your body paragraph? And have you talked about what theme is or idea is being conveyed or what perspective is being conveyed? All right, so let's have a look at the introduction. And I'll just read through it without saying anything first, and then we can go through it together later. So, in the novel Storyland, 2017 by Catherine McKinnon, the reader follows the account of 5 narratives through drastically different time periods in an ascending timeline. The narratives of Will, Martin, Lola, and Nada stand out to construct a powerful interpretation of Australia's history, present, and future. Through these narratives, the use of imagery, connections between land and character, and motives. Okay, let me read that again. Through these narratives, the use of imagery, connections between land and character, and motifs work together to convey a thought-provoking theme of how the ignorance of our actions and lack of regard for future generations will lead to the destruction of the world around us in the future. Okay, so I'm just going to make a few markings. I'll explain what I'm doing here later. So let's start from the beginning again. In the novel Storyland 2017 by Catherine McKinnon. Okay, that's good. This is bad because this is the title of a novel. If you're writing the title of a novel or if you're typing it, then you need to use italics. If you're writing it, you need to underline it. Okay, and that's for novels only. He's put the publication date in brackets, so that's good. And he's also introduced the author, which is good. The reader follows the account of 5 narratives. Oh, so you never want to type 5. You want to spell it out using your words. The account of 5 narratives through drastically different time periods in an ascending timeline. Okay, so this is the opening sentence of his entire essay. He doesn't have a global statement. He goes straight into introducing the text. So not having a global statement is fine, because sometimes you just can't think of a good one, and there's no point of introducing a global statement if you can't think of a good one. So coming straight into introducing the text is fine. But he introduces the text in a strange way. He says about it, the reader follows the account of 5 narratives through drastically different time periods in an ascending timeline. So although all of that may be true, the question I'm asking is, how is that related to setting in any way, or how is that related to a theme, an idea, or a perspective? And the answer is, it really doesn't. It's just telling me how this story is structured. And because this question is not about the structure of the novel or the story or whatever it is, there really is no place for this here. I mean, you can write it, but really it's just fluff. It makes your introduction longer and it sounds smart, but does it really add any value? Can I give you any marks for this? No, I can't. Or your teacher shouldn't be giving you marks for this, because you're not really introducing the text in a proper way. I would actually go in the Storyland 2017 by Catherine McKinnon, and then talk about something to do with setting, or what theme or ideas are you talking about, or what perspectives are you talking about. That's the main thing that I want to know. So talk about these, or introduce the story, not in terms of retelling who the characters in the story are or what happens in the story, but talk about the story in terms of course concepts. I think that's a very important thing that a lot of students don't do. So introduce the story in terms of course concepts. And what I mean by course concepts, I mean themes, I mean ideas, I mean perspectives, representations, context, stuff like that, depending on the question, obviously. So in this question, the course concepts are themes, ideas, and perspectives. Introduce the story in terms of those concepts. Don't tell me about structure. Don't tell me what happens in the story, because I can't give you marks for that. I want you to introduce it. And so if you talk a little bit about the theme or the idea, I know that your entire essay is going to be about a theme or an idea or a perspective. So that's something that not a lot of students know how to do. And when teachers tell them, don't retell the story, they don't know any other options, so they just retell the story anyway, even though they know it's wrong. So very hot tip here, introduce the story in terms of course concepts. Very good tip. Okay. The narratives of Will, Martin, Lola, and Nada stand out to construct a powerful interpretation of Australia's history, present and future. Again, I can't really see what this is adding, or what value this sentence adds to the essay, because it's not talking about course concepts. It's talking about who the characters are. I don't need to know that, because when you write the essay, you assume the person who's reading the essay has already read the novel or seen the movie. Stand out to, yeah. It's useless. Okay, hang on. Another point here is that forget the adjectives, all right? You see this powerful interpretation of Australia's history, present and future. Sounds smart, but that's your opinion. You don't include opinions in an essay. This is a powerful interpretation. What does that even mean? It sounds good, but it doesn't add anything to your essay, and it's an adjective that you don't want to add. This is an essay. This is not a book review. You're not reviewing, how good the book is or how powerful its message is or anything like that. You're basically arguing or trying to answer this question. Okay, so after those two sentences, we move straight into the thesis. And if you notice why I put brackets around here, it's because this whole thing is one sentence, and that's too long. First of all, it's too long for a sentence, and second of all, it's too long for a thesis. The thesis should be a one-sentence answer to the question. But obviously, the reason why it's long is because there's a lot of elements in here that he's written, and a lot of those would have been better suited in previous sentences just before the thesis. And so let's have a look. Through these narratives, the use of imagery, connections between land and character, and motifs work together. All right, so imagery, connections between land and character, and motifs. So I see here that he's talking about, or he's finally talking about setting, which is the evidence he's going to be using in his body paragraph. The problem is, it's not obvious that he's talking about setting. He's talking about imagery here. When you read his body paragraphs, it becomes obvious that when he's talking about imagery, he's talking about imagery of the setting. But again, he hasn't really talked about that here, so that makes me confused. Connections between land and character, that's obvious. You don't really have to explicitly link that to setting. And motifs. He needs to link motifs to setting as well. So I think instead of just chucking all of this and trying to fit it into this giant sentence, how about instead of having these filler sentences previously here, we can, he can talk more about imagery. What about imagery? Imagery of the setting. What part of the setting? Go into more detail about what these techniques are and how is that linked to setting. Connections between land and character, that's very broad. Which character? What part of the land? And what is that connection that is being made? And the motifs, there's so many different recurring elements and that are meaningful throughout the story. There's not going to be one motif. I want to know what these motifs are. Are they related to setting? And how does that convey a theme, an idea, or a perspective? Work together. So he says work together as well. So if you don't tell me how these things work together, as in, they're separate techniques. You have to talk about how they work together because you stated it. To convey a thought-provoking theme. A thought-provoking theme of how the ignorance of our actions and lack of regard for future generations will lead to the destruction of the world around us in the future. So that's fine. He's basically arguing that this is the idea. The ignorance of our actions and the lack of regard for future generations will lead to the destruction of the world around us in the future. And big sentence, how can we make that simpler? It's basically saying being ignorant and not caring about the future, we destroy the environment. Or not caring about the future to us destroying the environment. Okay, there we go. That's basically what he's saying. His thesis is fine. I'm just putting this here so that we can better understand, or we can refer to it in an easier way instead of quoting this whole giant thing. Also, notice how he's talked about a theme here, a thought-provoking theme. Is it a theme? No, it's more of an idea. This is more of an idea. This is a higher level, what do you call it? It demonstrates a deeper level of understanding, because the theme would just be environment or like environmental destruction. But this is more than that. It's talking about what leads to environmental destruction by our ignorance and our lack of regard for future generations, by not caring about the future, basically. So forget about the word thought-provoking, because again, that's just an adjective to make you sound smart. And instead of theme, let's put in idea. Ooh. Okay, that's an idea. So in order to improve this introduction, the most important thing is to expand more about these techniques that you're going to be using. That's the first part. The second part is he doesn't really talk about, how is he supporting this idea in his body paragraphs. Obviously, you're going to have body paragraphs in your essay. What are your body paragraphs going to be about? He hasn't talked about any of his what he's going to be saying in the rest of his essay. All I know is that, he's going to be discussing this idea that's in his thesis. So he needs to include what he's talking about in his body paragraphs. He needs to expand on the techniques a little bit more, I think. Maybe he can talk about the context if it's related to context in any way, and introduce more of the course concepts. I think that's very important. He doesn't really talk about the themes or ideas or perspectives or setting anywhere but in the last paragraph, which is way too big. So those are the things that he needs to do in order to improve his body paragraph, in order to improve his introduction. And introducing a global statement wouldn't hurt as well, as long as it's good. If you can't think of a good global statement that engages the reader and introduces the course concepts or introduces the essay, then don't bother putting one in because it's weird. I've seen some of his other global statements and it just doesn't fit in because you're trying to sound smart, but then it doesn't add anything. It doesn't add any value to your essay. It's not engaging. It's super generic. It doesn't have any meaning. So if you can't think of a good one, don't include it. All right. So that leads us on to our first body paragraph. And from our introduction, like I said, because he hasn't really talked about his main arguments or what he's going to be talking about in his essay in terms of his body paragraphs, I don't actually know what his body paragraphs will be about. So, going into his body paragraphs, I'm going in blind. I don't know what to expect, other than he's going to be arguing his thesis, right? That by being ignorant and not caring about the future, that will lead us to destroy the environment. Okay. So, let me get my green pen out again. The novel constructs the idea that we are oblivious to the consequences of our actions and how it will contribute to the degradation of land for future generations. Okay, so that's his topic sentence. It's not good because it's basically exactly what he said in his thesis, just reworded. So it's not an idea supporting his thesis, but we'll go into that later. Let's just read the rest of this. This is supported by the imagery provoked by the description of Mr. Dempster's land as described by Lola in her narrative. Lola describes his land as full of straight lines. So this is evidence here. Full of straight lines, and behind the sheds are 5 long paddocks. He runs cattle and keeps fowls. Most of his land is cleared. On the far side of the paddocks runs the last line of trees. Okay, it's a very big quote. This creates a picture of Mr. Dempster's land as slowly getting more industrialized, evident from the livestock sheds and crops. The clearing of large amounts of land to make way for personal use, such as for agriculture, portray the change of the natural landscapes being altered into flat, empty land. Later in Nada's narrative, her reflection of why the world is destroyed builds onto Lola's narrative. Okay, so this is the second part of the paragraph. The quote, but what makes a home? Not wood, not bricks. Yet the biggest danger came from our home itself. Only we didn't know what our home was. Okay. That's evidence. Well, that's his evidence. Is a direct referral to Mr. Dempster's land. The line, not wood, not bricks, show Nada's perspective that we have treated home as something that is materialistic, shown by Mr. Dempster's greed to gain land for his use. The latter of the quote, I'm going to underline this because I want to talk about this later. The latter of the quote highlights that because of our misunderstanding of our perspective that home was the need to advance materialistically, it has played to be our greatest danger for the future of humanity. Through these two narratives, Mackinnon positions the reader to reflect on their actions by providing her perspective that we are often ignorant of our actions and the effects of its consequences can be dire. Okay. So there's a lot to talk about, but let's have a look at the first half first. All right. So we have our topic sentence here. Right, I know it's in Comic Sans. It's a deliberate choice. But I need to make it smaller. Okay. So the problem with this topic sentence is that a topic sentence, or each of your body paragraphs, should be a supporting argument that links to your thesis. So each of your body paragraphs should be a supporting argument that links to your thesis. It should be a reason as to why you think your thesis is correct, right? So it should support your main argument, which is your thesis. The problem with this topic sentence is that it's not a separate thing from the thesis. It's not a separate argument that supports the thesis. It's basically the exact same as the thesis. Which begs the question, why even have a body paragraph in the first place? You know, the reason why you have a paragraph is so that you can show that you're talking about a new idea. But this isn't really a new idea. This is the exact same as the thesis. So that's what I really don't like about it, and that's why I don't really consider this a topic sentence. So what should I say? Topic sentence should be an argument supporting the thesis, not the exact same as the thesis. Just reworded. Stop doing this. Let me click you. Why? Okay, there we go. And we can see how this thesis, I'll talk about this, but the problem with this topic sentence is that because it's not clear on what it's actually trying to say, or because we don't know what this paragraph is about, the paragraph is kind of confusing. It's not cohesive. It doesn't work together to link to some argument or to link to something. It just goes all over the place. All right, this is supported by the imagery provoked by the description of Mr. Dempster's land. So this is good because he actually talks about, this is supported by the imagery provoked by the description of Mr. Dempster's land. So now we know that he's talking about setting, right? Because it's imagery of the landscape as described by Lola in her narrative. You don't need to say this. Lola describes his land as full of straight lines. Okay, so this is where he has his evidence. Problem with this evidence is that it's way too big. Full of straight lines, and behind the sheds are his 5 long paddocks. He runs cattle and keeps fowls. Most of his land is cleared. On the far side of the paddocks runs the last line of trees. When you have to remember a lot of quotes, you know, when you go into your exam, you don't want big chunks like this. The reason, because first of all, it's bad use of a quote. You want to analyze specific parts of the quote and what they mean, not take a giant chunk and no one knows what specifically you're talking about. And you know, when you go into an exam, you have to remember a lot of quotes, and you're already under a lot of stress. You're not going to be able to remember this big chunk of information, or most people won't be able to remember this big chunk of information unless you spend a lot of time, or you're naturally talented in terms of memory. So this is why I don't like big quotes like this, because first of all, I don't really know what he's talking about specifically. Okay, green pen. This creates a picture of Mr. Dempster's land as slowly getting more industrialized, evident from the livestock sheds and crops. Okay, that's good, because it's talking about imagery, right? This creates a picture of Mr. Dempster's land. The clearing of large amounts of land to make way for personal use, such as agriculture, portray the change of the natural landscapes being altered into flat, empty land. Okay, this is also good. Stop. This is also good. The problem is, what does that say about his thesis or his topic sentence? Because his topic sentence is his thesis, right? So does this explanation talk or say anything about the ignorance of our actions? Not really. What about the lack of regard for future generations? I can't see anything that talks about that. And how that leads to the destruction of the world around us, or destruction to our natural environment. Well, he does talk about how this is about the destruction of our natural environment, but as you can see, because he doesn't talk about the ignorance of Mr. Dempster's actions, or the lack of regard for future generations, or he doesn't make that clear, he doesn't really answer, or he doesn't really support his thesis in his explanation. So although these 2 points are good, he needed a couple more sentences linking that together. He needed to mention that maybe Mr. Dempster was ignorant of his actions. He didn't really understand, the consequences his actions had on the environment. Or maybe he didn't, I haven't read the text, but he didn't explain how Mr. Dempster's lack of regard for future generations led to the destruction of the natural environment. So this piece of evidence or explanation, although it's good, it's only halfway there. And I can't really give you many marks for that. Or your teacher won't be able to award you many marks for that, because it doesn't really link to your thesis. Okay, so that's his first half of his body paragraph. Second half of his body paragraph. Let's have a look through it again. Later in Nada's narrative, her reflection of why the world is destroyed builds onto Lola's narrative. The quote, "But what makes a home? Not wood, not bricks, yet the biggest danger came from our home itself, only we didn't know what our home was." Okay, so he introduces the quote here later in Nada's narrative. Her reflection of why the world is destroyed builds onto Lola's narrative. This is a bit of retelling the story. I know he's introducing the quote and the context of the quote, but introduce the context of the quote in terms of course concepts. Is it talking about, again, we're talking about setting, or maybe we're talking about imagery of the setting, or the relationship between character and setting, something like that. You need to mention it. The quote, "But what makes a home? Not wood, not bricks, yet the biggest danger came from our home itself, only we didn't know what our home was," is a direct referral to Mr. Dempster's land. Okay, so it's a direct referral to Mr. Dempster's land. What technique is this? Is this about setting? Yes. But remember in our introduction, we talked about imagery, connections between land and character, and motifs. Does that fit in any of those? No. So again, it's something that you're surprising the reader with. So although it is about setting, it's not one of those things that we've mentioned. Which I think you need to elaborate a little bit more on. Okay, is a direct referral to Mr. Dempster's land. I haven't read the text, so I don't know if that's true or not, but I'll assume it is. The line, "not wood, not bricks." So this is good, because you have your quote, and then you're talking about specific parts of your quote and explaining it. So that's good, that's being specific. And the more specific you can be in your essay, the better your writing will be, and the more marks you can get, and the more understanding you can show. Because the whole point of an essay is to demonstrate that you understand the text. The line, "not wood, not bricks," show Nada's perspective that we have treated home as something that is materialistic. Okay, shown by Mr. Dempster's greed to gain land for his use. Shown by Mr. Dempster's greed to gain land for his use. Well, you say shown by Mr. Dempster's greed, but you haven't really shown that. This quote does not tell me that Mr. Dempster is greedy and that he wants to gain land for his use. So maybe you've selected the wrong quote here, or maybe you needed to include another quote to support your argument, but you haven't really shown this, so yeah, it's just come out of nowhere. The ladder of the quote, ladder of what quote? This quote, and just re-quote it again. You don't have to say the ladder of the quote, right? Because I don't know what part of the quote you're referring to. Stop doing that. Question mark. Highlights that because of our misunderstanding of our perspective, or because of our wrong perspective, or our misunderstood perspective, why am I crossing that? that home was the need to advance materialistically, okay, that home was the need to advance materialistically, it has played to be our greatest danger for the future of humanity. This explanation, it does link to your thesis, but it doesn't link to your quote. The latter of the quote highlights that because of our misunderstanding of our perspective, that home, how has it played to be the greatest danger? You haven't shown that at all. So you're saying that we misunderstood, or we had the wrong idea, basically, that, you know, the idea of home was to advance materialistically, was to gain more land or to have a bigger house or something like that. And then you say, that has played to be our greatest danger for the future of humanity. I'm not sure how that is linked to the quote at all. You haven't explained that. You know, the link from the evidence to the explanation is not clear. And so I can't give you marks for that because it doesn't really demonstrate any understanding, even though it answers the question, and it's a bit off. Okay, and then we finally go back into the tie back. So let me quickly label all the parts of the paragraph. Through these two narratives, or some people use teal paragraphs, right? So I think this is called link back. So through these two narratives, McKinnon positions the reader to reflect on their actions. Okay, so finally we have something here. So McKinnon positions the reader to reflect on their actions by providing her perspective that we are often ignorant of our actions and the effects of its consequences can be dire. So this is a very good link back. Unfortunately, it's the final part of the body paragraph. We should have gotten that all the way up the top. Instead of having this topic sentence, which is just repeating the thesis, we should have had something that mentioned that, you know, the author, one of the ways that the author shows that being ignorant of our actions and our lack of regard for future generations will lead to the destruction of the environment is by positioning the reader to reflect on their actions. You know, so that shows that okay, I'm getting all my words mixed up, but for the topic sentence, instead of repeating the thesis, we should have said that McKinnon positions the reader to reflect on their actions by providing her perspective, okay? That we are often ignorant of our actions and the effects of its consequences can be dire. Okay, this is something else that's confusing me. We're talking about ideas here. Why are we talking about perspectives now? That's not clear to me. Where did this come from? I thought we were talking about, you know, conveying themes or conveying perspectives or conveying perspectives. In our thesis, we only mentioned themes. So why are we talking about perspectives now? Where has this come from? We shouldn't have this. We shouldn't have this at all. McKinnon positions the reader to reflect on their actions by providing her perspective, or providing the idea to reflect on their actions by, or creating the idea that we are, or portraying the idea that we are often ignorant of our actions and the effects of its consequences can be dire. Yes. So that should be in the topic sentence. It should be about, you know, the reader is positioned to reflect on their actions, and or the actions of the characters maybe, so that we can see how by being ignorant and not caring about the future, it leads us to destroying the environment. Is that even proper English? Leads to us destroying the environment. Okay. So, how do we make this paragraph better? There's a lot of issues with it, as we can see. But I think that the biggest issue here is that his topic sentence isn't clear. I'm going to swap this color to a different one. So the biggest issue here is that his topic sentence isn't clear. And when your topic sentence isn't clear, it's a reflection of your thoughts, right? And that means that the person who wrote this wasn't clear about what their topic sentence even is about, or what their paragraph was even going to be about. That's why he wasn't being able to articulate it clearly in his topic sentence. He doesn't know. He doesn't understand what he wants to write about. And this can be solved with proper planning. It's obvious that because this paragraph is going all over the place and arguing so many different things, and I can tell that he hasn't properly planned his essay, or at least his body paragraph. All right, so he has a poor topic sentence. That's the first one. It's not clear. Topic sentence is not clear. Not clear, precise. Okay. The second big issue is his explanation. The explanation is the most important. The explanation in your body paragraphs is the most important part of your essay. So if you're not explaining things properly, then you're missing out on a lot of marks, because a big part of your weighting in your essay is actually on demonstrating understanding, demonstrating complex understanding. How do you demonstrate understanding? By explaining things that are complex in simple ways. So when your explanation is like half done like this, it doesn't fully explain something, or your explanation doesn't really link to your evidence well, then the marker is just going to assume that you don't understand what you're writing about. And if the marker says this person doesn't know what he's writing about, then why would you get marks for anything? Which criteria are you going to fill? Because you're marked based on a criteria, right? You're gonna basically target the criteria that shows that you don't really understand much about what's going on. Even if you do, because I know my student, and when we discussed this essay together, and I talked about his explanation, he was definitely able to articulate what he was trying to say. But the point is, you don't get that opportunity when you hand in your exam or you hand in your essay to your teacher, right? Your teacher just marks it and then he gives you back the marks. If it's not stated on the essay, in your explanation part, actually, that's not even your explanation. Your explanation part, then they can't give you marks for it. And that kind of is linked to your topic sentence as well, because what are you trying to link your quote to? If you don't have something clear, like a topic sentence or an aim, then your explanation is going to go all over the place, because you don't even know what you're trying to explain, because your topic sentence is not clear. So the bad explanation in this, or the half-written explanations in this body paragraph, part of the reason of that is because you didn't have a clear and concise or precise topic sentence. And I think that's the two biggest points that I wanted to make about this body paragraph. And of course, we have all this other stuff, like the quotes are too big. For the first piece of evidence, for evidence 1, the quote is too big, full of straight lines, blah, 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 blah. For evidence 2, this quote is talking about setting, yes, but we can't just talk about setting. We have to talk about a specific technique. If you're not talking about a technique, that's a low level, it's a basic piece of evidence that's at like a year 9, year 10 level. And obviously we want to be writing at a year 11, year 12 level, right? I mean, even in year 9, you learn techniques like persuasive techniques, you learn stuff like imagery, all that kind of stuff. So you're expected to use that. You don't want to just quote something that's not a technique. But other than that, the tieback sentence is actually good. So Props to him for that. Is there anything else I want to say? Yes. The way you get around this, so how do you actually improve this? You need to plan properly. You need to plan precisely. If you haven't seen my how to write a good essay video, I don't know what it's called. I think it's just called Section 2 essay because it's essays are this second section for the ATAR exam. You can see that before I show you the essay, I show you my entire plan, and my plan is in a lot of detail. The reason why you want to plan something in a lot of detail is because you don't want to end up with something like this. You don't want to, be too arrogant and say, oh yeah, I don't need to plan, I can just start writing. And then what happens when you start writing is you think of different ideas, or you think of better ideas, or you think what I'm writing actually makes no sense. But then because you've already started writing, you've already spent all that time, or you've already invested all that time writing, you're in too deep to change. And in order to avoid that situation, you need to plan first and then hash it out all in your plan. When you're planning something, you think about it, and then you can actually cross it out if you don't think it's good, or you can add certain stuff, or you can change something until you think it's acceptable to start writing. You don't want to have all those issues when you are actually writing your essay. So to get around this, really, effective planning, out of the hour, let's say you're given 60 minutes to plan and write, I would spend about 15 to 20 minutes just planning. Plan all your body paragraphs in detail. Plan your explanations especially. You want to have your thesis. I'll use a different color. Let's use pink. You want to have your thesis down. In your plan. Very clear. What is your thesis exactly? Word it out. Not just a dot point, but full sentence. What are you actually going to put in your essay? You want to have your thesis sorted out. You want to have all your topic sentences sorted out. Topic sentence. I'll just write TS. You want to have all your pieces of evidence selected. You want to have your explanations. Explanations are going to be the juiciest part of your essay. You want to explain precisely in dot points, how does your quote link to your topic sentence, and how does that link to your thesis? So you have to think about that before you even start writing. Don't figure it out on the go, because you're going to end up with something like this that's confusing and that's not very effective. You want to think about it in your plan. And one exercise that I do with most of my students who don't understand the importance of planning is I literally just go, don't think about writing the essay yet, just time yourself. So I just put the stopwatch on my phone and I say, all right, you have 20 minutes. Just plan in as much detail as possible what you're going to write for this essay, or what are you going to write for this short response, or whatever it is. Just spend the full 20 minutes planning, and you're not allowed to start writing at all. And so when they realize, or when they spend the entire 15 or 20 minutes planning, and when the 20 minutes is up, they have this plan that's in a lot of detail because they've given it a lot of thought. And once you have a plan that's in a lot of detail, you have the confidence to start writing in an effective way, because you've already thought up every single thing that could go wrong, or what's not going to work, or what's contradictory with each other, and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people think that, usually when I write an essay, I run out of time. Well, the reason why you run out of time is because you're trying to write and think on the fly. Just worry about thinking in terms of a diagram if you want to create your plan that way visually, or if you want to use dot points, whatever it is, just spend the time planning. Just spend the time planning, and you can sort out a lot of these problems together, or you can fix a lot of the problems, or the common problems that students come across. Okay, so let's have a look at how we're going to rewrite this body paragraph. Let me copy all of this stuff. I'm not going to rewrite the introduction because I haven't read the text, so I don't know enough about this text to write the introduction. But I think we have enough information to work with here to rewrite the body. So that's our body paragraph. Let's make the font a little bigger. Boom, boom. All right. Zoom in a little bit more as well to make it clearer for you guys. Okay, the novel constructs an idea that we are oblivious to the consequences of our actions and how it will contribute to the detrimental degradation of land for future generations. Nope. We don't want this. We want something about reflecting on our actions. Okay. I've rewritten the topic sentence, so now it goes. The novel constructs the idea that ignorance can lead to environmental deterioration in the future by inviting the audience to reflect on the consequences of their current actions. So this part, inviting the audience to reflect on the consequences of the current actions, is basically what I'm arguing in this paragraph, but I'm also linking that to the thesis, right? This is achieved through imagery utilized by McKinnon to describe Mr. Dempster's land. Most of his land is cleared to make way for livestock in 5 long paddocks and is filled with straight lines, with the far side of the paddock containing the last line of trees. So notice how I've broken up the quote to focus on the important parts, which is basically imagery, instead of chucking in the whole bit there, which no one is going to remember. And it also shows the marker that I understand what imagery is and that I'm only taking in the key points. That's important. The use of imagery allows the reader to visualize the environmental damage required to make way for agricultural activities and causes the reader to reflect on the sustainability of these practices and the actions of people such as Mr. Dempster. So not only am I explaining the quote, I'm explaining the quote and then linking it to the fact that McKinnon is trying to invite the audience to reflect on the consequences of their current actions, which links to the idea or constructs the idea that ignorance can lead to environmental damage, right? So that's my explanation there. And that's the thing that my student was missing. He kind of explained the quote, but he forgot to link it really. So through imagery, McKinnon leads the audience to contemplate our ignorance in unsustainable practices such as farming and its negative environmental impact. This is also explored in Nada's reflection of home. The quote, "But what makes a home? Not wood, not bricks. Yet the biggest danger came from our home itself. Only we didn't know what our home was," is in reference to Mr. Dempster's land, with home used as a symbol for what we find comforting. So I've included home as symbolism there. The line, "not wood, not bricks," show Nada's perspective that we have wrongly found comfort in materialism, as shown through the destruction of the natural landscape to be replaced with Mr. Dempster's agricultural activities. So, I think this is what my student was trying to say all along. I'm just cleaning it up and then presenting it in a clearer way. This reflective tone and the use of home as symbol, or as a symbol, haven't proofread it yet, as a symbol for comfort, again invites the audience to reflect on our ignorance of how our actions and motivations can cause the destruction of our environment, impacting the future. So again, I have a big part of it that's not only explaining the quote, but then also linking it to this idea that, you know, the author gets us to contemplate how our ignorance leads to environmental degradation or destruction by getting us to reflect on our actions, right? By making it clear to the audience, you know, this is what we're doing. What you're reading in the book right now, this is what we're doing. Maybe we should think about this and reflect on it and come up with the idea that maybe our ignorance, when we weren't thinking about it before, guess what? It's actually destroying the environment. Through these two narratives, McKinnon positions the reader to reflect on their actions by providing her perspective that we are often ignorant of our actions and the effects of its consequences can be dire. Okay, yeah, I haven't changed this thing there, his link back. All right, important thing here is let's have a look at explanation. So I'll highlight all the parts of the paragraph that I would consider explanation. So if you have a look at the whole paragraph, basically half the paragraph is your explanation. And as I said before, the reason for this is because the explanation is basically the main part where you get awarded marks, because you're demonstrating understanding and you're linking your quote to your topic sentence, and also how does that link to your thesis. So the explanation should be a very big part of your topic, of your body paragraph, sorry. This has been a long video. Okay, we're not going to go through the rest of the body paragraphs. I hope that this has been helpful for you guys. So remember, 3 main takeaways from this video. The first one is that you should plan. So always spend the time to plan effectively and in detail. So spend the time planning, whether it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes. You know, I think 5 or 10 minutes is way too short. So I'd say at least 15 minutes. Just sit there and, you know, I know you're stressed out in your exam, but just sit there for the 15 minutes to plan. The second thing is you need a clear topic sentence. If you don't have a clear topic sentence, which you can get through careful planning, you're not going to really know what you're writing about. And that's going to affect your whole paragraph because it doesn't link with each other. It doesn't work with each other. It's not cohesive. And the last part is to make sure that you explain things step by step. So make sure you include every single part of your explanation. You know, when you're writing things down, you already know it in your brain, right? But the other person can't read your mind. So you need to write down everything that you're thinking, all the parts that are required to make sense of what you're trying to say. You know, you can't just tell half the story and expect the other half, you know, expect the person to understand the other half when it's not even on the page. And if your paragraphs get a little big because of it, then don't worry about it. Maybe for you, if you can't write a lot, or you can't write very quickly, or you spend a lot of time thinking, then just write 2 good body paragraphs. Maybe you don't have the time to write 3 body paragraphs. It's better to write 2 good body paragraphs than to write 3 badly written ones. And really, that's all the advice I can give you, I think, from this one paragraph without this video going on for like 50 million hours. But if you'd like, send me, or you can message me, or my email will be in the description below. But if you'd like feedback for your own practice essays that you've written or practice paragraphs that you've written, don't be afraid to send them to me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you.